the cave, the nature of the cave. Watch this in 1 Samuel 23:14. If this doesn't tell us what God does for us in the cave, I don't know that anything else will. It says, David stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. God did not give David into his hands. And here he is in the desert of Ziph. And I want you to focus on this for a moment. So now he's at a place where he has left his country. He has left his comfort. He has been on the lam. He is running for his life. And now it says, this perfect language, it says that he's in the desert of Ziph. Ziph literally means refinery. What other is the cave in our life than a place that refines us to look more like Christ? The things in your life, let me say it this way. There are things that happen in your life, and think even of your past, that you would never want to go through again, but they're the very things you would never wish away because they made you into the person you are today. That's what the cave does. Is the cave is a refining fire. The cave really gets the impurities out of you. And even in David's life, it really tests your integrity and your values. It's testing our integrity in our values. It's trying to see, okay, you say you love God. Okay, you say you trust His word. Okay, you made these vows on your wedding day. Are you really going to stand true to your integrity, to your values? The cave in your life is a place that you think people sent you, but it's really a place God has allowed you to go sometimes because of what He's trying to do on the other side of the cave. Is that it's a refining point in your life. And again, I'll say this, is that it's not just what people are doing to you, it's what God is doing for you. It's not just what people have done to you, it's what God is working in you and through you by allowing you to be in a place. And think about a cave, it's a dark place. And in this story, as we study, is David's in the cave with his men, and when Saul goes to the cave by himself to relieve himself, to go to the restroom, this is exactly what the cave is as well. As it's a place where you get overlooked. It's a place that people can't see you. It's a place that people misrepresent you, misunderstand you. It's a place where Saul couldn't even see what was right in front of his own eyes. But from the cave, here's what's happening in the cave as a refining place, is your perspective gets stronger in the cave. Is that he could see immediately that it was Saul coming to attack him. The refining process of the cave, the nature of the cave, is that God is trying to mold and shape and refine, get the impurities out, get the lack of trust out. And I don't know about you, I wish it wasn't like this with God. I wish I was really good at being close to God and times I was on the mountaintop. That's just not how it is. Maybe with you, maybe you're better than I am, but it's often when I'm on my way to the hospital, it's often when I'm going through a hard season, that's when I pray more to God. That's when I read more of His words. That's when I'm better in community. Hey, will you pray for me? I'll often go through bad seasons, and I won't ask for prayer until it really gets to a tipping point. And I don't know about you, but that's where the cave comes into play, is that the nature of the cave is to refine you, is to make us more Christ-like, to get us out of us, to become less of ourselves and become more of Christ in our life. And that's the nature of the cave, is to test our integrity and our values. But it's so that you can address now the nature of the calling. The nature of the calling. And I love this part of the story. And as I'm even studying this, the more that I read the story of all the way from the Old Testament, all the way to the New Testament, let me catch you up. The Old Testament, God calls Abraham and He says, I'm going to bless you. You're going to be the father of nations. And when I bless you, you're going to be a blessing to others. And so then Abraham goes, and Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob later becomes Israel. And Israel has 12 sons. And one of those 12 sons is Joseph. And then you've got Joseph is like the runt of the family. I mean, he's like the hated one. His dad gives him the colored coat, the rainbow coat. Everybody in the family hates Joseph. They kick him out of the family. They beat him. It gets pretty brutal, actually. I'm just giving you the PG version. They throw him into a pit. He gets picked up. He gets sold off into slavery, gets taken into Egypt. And this is Joseph. Joseph now is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Follow this, okay? So now the 12 sons of Jacob become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Joseph is in the palace now, and he served and honored God so much in his pit, which was his cave, but in his pit, that he got elevated to leadership. He got honored beyond what he really should have been. And now he begins to serve Pharaoh in Egypt. And what takes place after that is now he begins to serve Pharaoh, serve the people of Egypt, serve all of the land through a time of famine. And what happens is the 11 brothers have to come to him, and they end up finding out that it was him all along. And he has this beautiful line. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, and the saving of many lives. And what ends up happening, in effect, is that Israel is united again. The 12 tribes, the 12 brothers are united. And then you see as they go into the wilderness, they go into Egypt, they end up going into the promised land. And now you have, fast forward, you have Joshua taking the people of God into the promised land. And once again, you have the 12 tribes reunited. And it was almost as if God's picture the entire time was to build this spiritual family that was united around Jesus, around God, around his Savior, around its Lord. And so they get into the promised land, and one by one, what you see in Joshua and then in Judges is that the 12 tribes were unwilling to eliminate the things that would one day create division in their family. And so now you have a picture of all of the 12 tribes of Jacob that should have been united together are in a place at the end of Judges, right before Saul comes into the scene. They're all divided, like I told you last week in Judges 19 through 20. They have their first civil war with each other. They should have been fighting their enemies, but they fought themselves instead because they were unwilling to fight the battles that God was actually asking them to fight. And so now you have this scene where they're all in this place, and Saul is meant to do something. He's meant to reign over them. And I'm not going to read all of these on the screen, but I'm going to highlight these really quick. And I want you to see this pattern that's taking place now. So now David, fast forward all this, David is now in the cave. David is the anointed one of God. He is the one to reign over Israel. And watch what happens. He's in the cave. It says that then David, and I want you to see all of these as I put them up there here. In the first verse, it says this, 24:4. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. See this pattern? Watch this, okay? Then 24:5, after David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, and then it continues, and David says this in 24:11, see, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but I did not kill you. And now watch this. Now you're going to see the final one is not David saying it, but it's Saul saying it. I'm going to bring this all together in a moment. So he finds out David doesn't really want to kill him, and he does this twice. He never really means it, but he says this. He says, I believe you, David. You're not trying to kill me. He says now in 24:21, now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. And so it translates as kill off. And so watch this whole time. David is in the cave, and this is the moment where they're calling him the commander-in-chief. And this is his moment to reject God or accept God's will for his life. This is his moment to trust God or to walk away from God. And it says that he cuts a corner off of his robe. And the whole theme of this chapter is he cuts off. Saul says, do not cut me off. Do not kill my family. And then watch what happens is that, get this picture. David is, in essence, he is standing in the middle of the history of Israel. And all he has in the past of Israel is division and divisiveness because they were unwilling to obey God. They chose convenience over obedience over and over and over again. And here is David. He's in a dark place. He's in a desolate place. The only people he has with him are distressed, in debt, or discontented. They call him the commander-in-chief, and he has a chance. Here it is, to be entitled or to be humble. To be entitled and say, I'm going to find convenience. I'm going to do what my people have always done here in the past. Or I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to stay humble. I'm going to trust God with this. So he cuts off a robe. And watch what happens. So he was tested in the cave. And the testing got him to the crown. We watch this. Watch the first thing it says in 2 Samuel. Now when you see him as king. 2 Samuel 5. 1-3. This is all the way the second book. What does it say? All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, we are your own flesh and blood. Let's keep reading. when all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed King David over Israel. So the entire time, David had a decision to make, is that I'm going to be willing to fight a battle my ancestors were never willing to fight. In our lives, every day, in every generation, you're going to have an opportunity to fight a battle previous descendants were unwilling to fight. Because it's our job to stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, just spiritually speaking of Israel, but also practically speaking of our own families, is that you're going to have to be willing to do this. And here's the thing, is that David had a decision to make, and all of Israel had a decision to make. Every time God asked them to fight a battle, they had to make a decision. Are we going to choose what's convenient and take the shortcut, take the easy route, take what's best for us, or are we going to do exactly what God said? We're going to obey him to the fullness, and we're going to trust him with the results. And here's David. He's in a moment, and he teaches us this lesson, is that the nature of the calling is very simple. And I hate to say it like this, but this is the only way I see it in the Bible, is that if you fail the test the first time, you're going to have to take it again in another season. Think about the people of Israel in the wilderness. How long were they in the wilderness? For 40 years. If you study enough, you know that that should have been an 11-day trip. And David knows this history of his family. They circled and circled and circled. Why? Because of one thing. They lacked a trust and a faith in God. Now, fast forward to the New Testament, famous story we all know about Peter. Peter and the disciples in Mark 4, Jesus says, let's go to the other side. And what does he end up saying to Peter? Or what ends up happening is their storm rages on them. And Jesus, if you read the Bible and you don't laugh a little bit, this is hilarious. Jesus is sleeping in the boat. They're going through Mach 5 winds. I don't even know if is that a thing? He just shook his head. He's like, no. They're going through bad winds, okay? They're going through a crazy storm, and they are freaking out. And Jesus is on his tufted needle bed, just taking a nap, sleeping. And they come to Jesus, and they say, don't you care that we're drowning? Don't you care that we're dying? That's in Mark 4. Then they get to take the test again, and it's a scene in Mark 6 where Peter walks out on the water as an attempt to trust Jesus even more. And if you're not careful, you're going to go through things in life, your family's going to go through things in life, and maybe you come from a past that has struggled with certain things all throughout generations, and maybe, just maybe, you might be the one to step in the middle of that lineage of your family and say, I'm willing to pass this test. I'm willing to fight this battle because my family has given me some tools. My friends have given me some tools. The Bible has given me some tools. And much like David, much like Israel, much like Peter, if you go into the cave and you make the decision for convenience over obedience, you're going to pay the price again and have to pass the test again. But if you go into the cave, humble, willing to pay the price, choosing obedience over convenience, you'll pass the test. And like David didn't just receive freedom from the cave, he ended up receiving the crown, which is always a picture of serving for God's kingdom. It wasn't a picture of his greatness. It was a picture of serving for God's kingdom. So the nature of the cave is that the cave represents what someone did to you, but also what God is working in you. The nature of the calling is that if you're not careful, if you don't pass the test now, you're going to have to pass the test in another season. And here's my favorite thing about the nature of the calling is that if you ever watch your life, you ever draw and connect the dots, the misery you have in the cave often becomes the ministry you have with the crown. And so the misery that David had is he stood in a place where the king wanted his life and division was the only thing he saw up until that point. So the misery he had to fight, the battle he had to fight one day, it allowed him, because he was faithful in that moment, he passed that test to put on the crown the ministry of uniting Israel once again. And so some of us have to go through pain where we see challenges when we're growing up, challenges in our life. And one day, if you pass those tests and you're faithful with God and you trust God and you choose the right way, not the easy way, God will bring you to a place where now your misery becomes your ministry. That's the nature of the calling. And then finally, and before I tell you a little bit of a story on this, finally, you have to study this, and this is probably the most important part, is the nature of the Father. Number 3, the nature of the Father. It says, I have been with you, and this is God to David after he had united Israel. He said, I have been with you wherever you have gone. I have cut off all of your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great like the names of the greatest men of earth. But I want you to go here to 2 Samuel 7:9, and I want you to focus on this. It says, I have been with you wherever you have gone, but you might have missed it. Go to the next slide and highlight this, is that, and I have cut off all of your enemies from before you. It's as if God was saying, because you were unwilling to cut off Saul, I was willing to cut off the enemies that were trying to kill you. And so what the enemy will try to do is he'll try to get you to focus on your own solutions, but God's word always gets you to focus on obedience over convenience, faithfulness over faithlessness, because if you focus on this, God will take care of the wilderness. God will take care of Saul. God will take care of the storm. But if you keep focusing, keep looking at Jesus, the same reason when Moses is in the battle and Aaron and Hur, the brothers, are having to hold up Moses' arms so that the staff which represented Jesus, who would one day die on the cross, holding up the staff was a picture of keep your focus on Jesus, keep your focus on faithfulness, let your focus be on the Father. And here's the problem. This might be the most important thing with how we deal with being faithful in the cave or faithless in the cave. And this is not in this story, but I want to bring it back to this text right here. And it's not going to be on the screen, but if you go and you study Matthew 25, Jesus gives this picture. And he says, the kingdom of God is like a man that went out and he was going on a trip, and he gives his business, he hands over his business to men in his kingdom. So he gives to one man 1 talent, 1 bag of gold, another 2 bags, another 5 bags. And he goes on the trip and he comes back, and it says that the man with 2 made 2. He went and he invested immediately. He took what the master gave him and he invested it. The one with 5 went and made 5 as well. And then it says when he brought the guy who had 1 talent before him, and it says that he gave to each according to their ability. The guy that had 1 comes back to the master and says, I did nothing with this because I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow. And it's this incredible picture that the reason most of us might not always be faithful in the cave, it all comes down to this one thing. The reason your integrity cracks, the reason my values crack, the reason I distrust God, the reason I don't do what I think I should do, the reason I fail at times is the same thing that we see in the guy's heart as he focuses on the master's heart, is that we don't trust God's character at the end of the day. Because if you really trusted God's character, you would leave it in his hands. You would pray that prayer and you would leave it in his hands. They would say that thing and you would just leave it in God's hands. The situation would happen, you'd leave it in God's hands. So the nature of the Father is that God comes to David, and it's like a loving father who is standing on the sideline saying, this is the test, David, you have to pass. I can't do this for you. This is a season in your life where it's going to be really hard, but you have to pass this test. I can't do this for you. And see, God will do a lot of things in our life, but he can't pass our tests for us. God will do a lot for us. He will send his son to save us. He will send his son to die for us. He will send his son to redeem us. But the one thing God is unwilling to do is pass a test for you. Because it's your character on the line. It's your faithfulness on the line. It's your trust in God on the line. And no one grows muscles without putting them to work. No one grows faith without having to trust God when it doesn't make sense. But the nature of the Father is like he said to David, I've always been there. I've always been there. I was watching. I know that was hard when they said that. I know it was hard when your family abandoned you. I know it was hard when they fired you from that job. I know it was hard when you went through COVID and you lost this and you lost that. I know it was hard, but I've always been with you. I've never left you. I've always been on your side. And so most importantly, your view of God affects our faithfulness in the cave. The view that we have of God affects our ability to choose convenience or to choose obedience. And so the nature of the cave is really a place that God will allow us to go, or God will send us to go, because he knows there's some tests we need to pass. There's some misery we might have to survive through, because one day it will become our ministry. And you have to remember the whole time is that the Father has always been faithful, not just to us, but to saints before us. He has always been there. He has never left us. He has never abandoned us. And so if you want to be faithful in the cave, it's very simple. You let God do the cutting, the pruning, and we do the trusting, and we do the obeying. If you want to be faithful in the cave, you let God do the cutting out this relationship, cutting out that opportunity, closing that door, closing out that option, closing out that solution, saying no to this, saying yes to this. You let God do the cutting, and we just keep obeying. We just keep trusting. We just keep walking in faithfulness. And so, do you want the easy way out, or do you want God's way out? Do you want obedience to be the description of your life, or do you want convenience to be the description of your life? I saw this movie years ago, and maybe you've seen this movie, but it's this movie where this man is going through life. He's got kids, he's got a job, he's got business, and maybe like some of us, even today, is that it can feel like there's parts of your life that are mundane, there's parts of your life that are unpleasant, there's parts of your life that you'd rather skip over or gloss over. It may be painful things or maybe boring things. And so in this movie, maybe you know the movie, but the man is going through life, and one day he gets to Bed Bath & Beyond, and he goes to the bed section, the bath section, and then he ends up in the miraculous place called Beyond. And he meets this man who has this remote. And this remote has these powers in this story. And what ends up happening is this man has this remote, and he learns that if he wants to, he can fast forward through the parts of his life that are boring. He can fast forward through the parts of his life that are mundane. He can fast forward through the parts of his life that are painful even. And so as the story goes, is he gets home, and he's sitting at the table, and his wife starts telling him about all the things that happened in her day, and you can just see him pull the remote, and he just fast forwards because he doesn't want to listen to his wife talk. And he fast forwards, and then she's done. He's like, that was awesome. And so then he gets in traffic, and he fast forwards as he's going through traffic. And then he gets home, and there's something happened with his kids, and he fast forwards to the playing part with his kids so he can get to the part that's exciting for his meeting at work or at the office. And then even at the office, he fast forwards to the boring meetings that he has. And what he ends up finding out in this movie is that every time he's fast forward, it taught the remote to fast forward the next time that same situation came up. And I say all of that because the temptation for us is to want to fast forward through the parts of our life that are boring, that are mundane, and that are painful. And so we get to a place in our life where we just live for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We just live for the weekends. Or we get home with our kids, the place that we should be the most present. And now our cell phone ends up ruling and reigning because we're at work or we're at the office while we're still at home. Or we're on a date with our spouse and we're just thinking about problems at home or problems at the office. And now we've gone through a place in our life where we have traded faithfulness, the calling in front of us, just for convenience, just for an easy life. And so the question comes again is that in our life as Christians, we have the choice to fast forward, to ignore, to get through the things in our life that are painful, mundane, or boring, or to actually see that those are the places in life that God is actually the most present. And so maybe for some of us, the application of this is that we're going to go home and we're going to put our phones away when we're at dinner with the kids. That we're going to choose to obedient rather than to be convenient. We're going to choose to be at a place where we put this is so real for me because it's so easy for me to have my phone notifying me when someone needs me or an email or a phone call. And if I'm going to choose obedience over convenience, I'm going to be willing to put that away, and I'm going to be willing to be with the kids. Or even when my kids are sick, is not trying to rush it, but trying to love my kids while they're sick. Is that I'm going to choose obedience over convenience. Or for some of us, it might be at a place where we have been living this Christian life trying to find ways to get at a place where God would just bless us and make us more comfortable and make things easy. Instead, what God might be trying to train us to do is, how can God use me more to serve those around me? How can God use me? I hate this job. I don't like this job that I have. Maybe God has called you to be a beacon of light in that job. So instead of trying to fast forward in your mind from 9 to 5 until you get to go home, maybe it's saying, God gave me these 8 hours a day to be God's beacon of light in the real world. It's that maybe there's areas of your life where God is calling you to sacrifice more, to serve more, to give of your life more to people around you. It's choosing obedience over convenience. And that's the lesson of the cave, is that God calls us not to live a life that's comfortable. He doesn't call us to live a life that's easy. He doesn't call us to live a life that's peaceful. And I'm telling you right now, the world is selling us on that right now. The world is selling us on, take this medicine, take this TV, scroll on this phone, take this credit card debt, do all of these things for convenience's sake. And the Christian life has never been one of convenience. It's never been one of just buying your way out of your problems, because here's what happens is when you scroll on the phone, if we can be real practical, and you put your phone down, the problems are still there. When you're watching TV and you try to forget your problems, the problems are still there. But here's the call of a Christian, is like David in the cave, is the call of the Christian is not to ignore the problem of the present. It's really to dive into it and say, God, what is the lesson you're trying to teach me right here, right now in this problem that I have? I'm not going to choose convenience. God, I'm going to go with obedience. And David had this beautiful mindset that said, is even when God isn't showing me deliverance, he still deserves my obedience. So even when I'm not seeing his deliverance, when I'm not seeing his freedom, he still deserves my obedience in this storm, in this cave, in this place in my life that doesn't always look like the goodness of God in my life. It's when the report comes back bad. It's when I get fired from that job. It's when they turn their back on me. It's saying this. It's saying, God, I can't find one person in the Bible that God ever did great things through that didn't have to go through something they wished was never in their life. And so now you see this picture is that not only was David in a cave, but now you fast forward 1,000 years and you see Jesus is killed, Jesus is murdered, Jesus is put into a cave, and they roll the stone away. And here is Jesus, as 1 Peter tells us, is that he is fighting a battle on our behalf, is that he was fighting in the dividing line between us and God. And that because he was willing in the garden to say, not my will, but your will be done, Father, on earth as it in heaven, he ends up dying, he ends up being killed so that he could reunite us with God. And so David was a man, and David was a picture for all of us that we could be faithful in the cave, faithful with the calling, and trust the Father's heart. But it was always a picture that one day Jesus would come and fight the battle we could never fight, and that he would unite heaven and earth once again so that all of those who trust in Jesus can be reunited with the Father again, saying that no matter how dark it gets on this side, I can always trust God to get me through to the other side. So because of that, I don't need convenience. God, you can have my obedience. You can have my obedience. You can have my trust. You can have my faith. So would you bow your heads and close your eyes?